My name is Brandon Rottinghaus, and I'm an associate professor of political science at the University of Houston. I study the executive broadly. That means the president and governors, and also as the governors and presidents interact with legislatures and courts. The thing that most politicians do when they're caught in scandal, especially executives, presidents and governors, is that they tend to try to retreat to their base, and they want to make sure that there's a firm, basic amount of support that they can rely on. So some of the work that I've done demonstrates that the stronger the foundation in the legislature for either governors or for president, the more likely they are to survive sort of in office, especially surviving impeachment trials and just generally keeping their jobs. The same cannot be true and is not true for staff. So individuals who work for the governor or work for the president or who are associated with the government in some other way that the executive has control over tend to be the first to go in scandals, and so it's not surprising in some ways that we see that this is what happened to some of Chris Christie's staff. Most politicians confronting scandal try to get to the heart of the matter and essentially try to cut it out like a cancer as quickly as possible, and effectively that's what Chris Christie did. It's also the case that I find that scandals beget more investigations, and so that's something that we've seen happen too, so that there have been additional inquiries into some of the use of certain kinds of funds from Chris Christie and other kinds of dealings, and so that's something I think that politicians don't think about as a kind of collateral to scandal. Well, I think to survive in the short term, he has to get some victories. He's got to be able to make sure that his agenda isn't compromised because of this, and I think that he's attempted to do that pretty fairly. I think in terms of the presidential race that this is likely to not be a major issue. I think it only became a major issue in part because he's been talked about as being a possible presidential candidate. So I don't know that this is the kind of thing that would really affect him much. Hillary Clinton is in a bit of a different boat. She's more of a known quantity, and so I think that if she wanted to, she could lock up the nomination tomorrow. Any kind of minor scandal that she might have been involved in have been trumpeted by the amount of money she can raise and by the kind of profile that she has. That said, the scholarship suggests that voters are more willing to forgive sort of personal scandals and less willing to forgive financial scandals. So this is probably for her an okay scenario if it's the case that people want to bring up the affairs that her husband had. Those kinds of things people tend to forgive, and in any case it wasn't her scandal to begin with. If the scandals become more financial in origin, like Whitewater, if those kinds of issues are brought up, and they probably will be, voters are less inclined to forgive candidates and politicians for that. So that could be problematic. You've got a paper that is forthcoming in a journal that looks at what happens during a campaign for president when an individual is accused of something and a scandal emerges, and scandals are defined in very sort of specific ways here. What ends up happening is that they tend to lose the ability to raise money. So by this standard, about $40,000 per day less of an intake. The scandals actually hurt Republican candidates more than they hurt Democratic candidates by about $20,000 per day.